I bought a $4 million villa on the oceanfront to spend my final years in peace, but as soon as my son-in-law found out, he called me. We are on our way to you, Clint. There will be 20 of us. Prepare beds, towels, slippers, and food. We will be staying for 4 weeks. We will be there in 30 minutes, so hurry up, old man. I smiled and made a plan. Before I tell you how I destroyed his ego, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an arrogant relative a lesson they would never forget. My name is Clinton Reeves. I am 69 years old. To the outside world, and specifically to my son-in-law Brad, I am just a retired old man living on a fixed income who got lucky with a cheap foreclosure property. They see my calloused hands and my simple clothes and they assume I am nobody. They do not know that these hands built half the industrial parks in the tri-state area. They do not know that I sold my empire for 9 figures 5 years ago and retreated into the shadows because I valued peace over power. But peace was the one thing denied to me that Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on my terrace holding a glass of vintage Cabernet, watching the Pacific waves crash against the rocks below. The silence was perfect. It was the kind of silence I had worked 40 years to earn. Then my phone rang. It was Brad. He did not say hello, he did not ask how I was, he simply barked orders like I was his employee. I listened to his demands. 20 people, 4 weeks, a full catering service expected within half an hour. My thumb hovered over the end call button. I was about to tell him to go to hell and block his number. I had cut ties with toxic people before. I was good at it. Then I heard it. A small, stifled sob from the background. It was Sarah, my daughter. She was in the car with him. I could hear her whispering, "Please, Brad, don't talk to him like that. Please, he is my dad." And I heard Brad snap back at her, "Shut up, Sarah, or you are walking the rest of the way." That sound froze the blood in my veins. My daughter was in trouble. If I locked the gate now, she would pay the price for his anger. I took a deep breath and swallowed my pride. "The gate is open," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was already calculating. Brad laughed. "Good boy, Clint. Have the drinks ready." I hung up the phone. I looked at my reflection in the glass door. I saw an old man in a polo shirt and khaki shorts. But behind my eyes, the shark was waking up. I walked to the security panel and disarmed the perimeter alarm. I walked to the wine cellar not to bring out the good stuff, but to hide it. I replaced my $3,000 bottles with $5 supermarket wine I kept for cooking. If they wanted a show, I would give them a show. 30 minutes later, the sound of engines shattered the tranquility of my street. It looked like an invasion. 5 black SUVs with tinted windows screeched to a halt in my driveway, blocking the entrance completely. Doors flew open and a crowd of loud, flashy people spilled out. They were Brad's crowd, men in tight suits that cost too much and fit too poorly. Women looking at their phones instead of the ocean. They carried the stench of cheap cologne and desperate ambition. Brad stepped out of the lead car. He looked around my property not with appreciation, but with the hungry eyes of a wolf evaluating a carcass. He saw the marble columns, the infinity pool, the sprawling gardens, and he did not see a home. He saw a dollar sign. Sarah stepped out of the passenger side. She looked pale. She was thinner than the last time I saw her. She wore long sleeves despite the summer heat. I knew immediately she was hiding bruises. I walked down the steps to greet them, before I could even open my arms to hug my daughter. Brad tossed a set of car keys at me. They hit my chest and fell to the ground. "Park the car, old man," he said loud enough for his friends to hear. "And be careful. That is a lease worth more than your life. Any scratch comes out of your nursing home fund." His friends laughed. It was a cruel, sycophantic sound. I bent down and picked up the keys. My hands were rough. Not because I was a gardener, as Brad often joked, but because I had started as a bricklayer. I knew the value of hard work. Brad only knew the value of a credit limit. I looked him in the eye. He smirked, waiting for me to resist, waiting for a reason to humiliate me further. I did not give him the satisfaction. Not yet. I will take care of it, I said softly. I got into his car. It smelled of stale smoke and arrogance. As I drove it to the garage, I noticed the gas tank was empty. Typical. I parked the car and took a moment to breathe. I needed to see exactly what I was dealing with. I walked back into the house and the invasion was in full swing. They had not even taken off their shoes. Mud and sand were being tracked all over the Italian travertine floors I had hand-selected. Luggage was thrown onto my white leather sofas. Someone had already opened the fridge and was complaining about the lack of imported beer. Brad was in the center of the living room holding court. He pointed at the vaulted ceiling. "Not bad for a fixer-upper," he shouted. "My father-in-law got it for pennies on the dollar. Government auction. He has no idea what it is really worth. But do not worry, boys. We are going to turn this place into a gold mine." I stood in the doorway listening. He was lying to them. He was minimizing my success to boost his own image. He needed them to think he was the alpha male who controlled the resources. "Hey, Clint!" Brad shouted, spotting me. "Do not just stand there. We are starving. Get in the kitchen and whip something up. And make it fancy." My investors have refined palates. Investors. That word caught my attention. These were not just friends. This was a business pitch, and my house was the bait. I went to the kitchen. Sarah followed me. She tried to help, but her hands were shaking. I held her shoulders. "Sweetheart, what is going on?" I asked. She looked toward the living room, terrified that Brad might see us talking. "Dad, just do what he says, please," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "He is under a lot of pressure. He owes people money, bad people. If this deal does not go through, I do not know what he will do." I squeezed her hands. "You are safe here, Sarah. I promise." She shook her head, pulling away as Brad walked in. "Where is the food?" he demanded. "Stop bothering your father, Sarah. He needs to focus. Go entertain the guests." Sarah fled the room. Brad leaned against the counter, picking an apple from a bowl and taking a bite before spitting it into the sink. "Mushy," he sneered. "Listen, Clint. Tonight is important. Do not embarrass me. Do not talk about your little construction jobs. Do not tell your boring stories. Just serve the food, pour the wine, and stay in the background. You are the help tonight." "Got it." I cut the vegetables. I seasoned the meat. I played the role. I served dinner to 20 people who treated me like I was invisible. They snapped their fingers at me when they wanted water. They handed me their dirty napkins. I absorbed every insult, every dismissive glance. I was gathering intelligence. I listened to their conversations. They were not investors. They were sharks smelling blood. They were talking about leverage, about flipping assets, about high-yield scams. Brad was trying to sell them something big, and he was desperate. Then it happened. The moment that sealed Brad's fate. We were in the main dining hall. I had just placed a bottle of wine on the table. One of Brad's friends, a man with greasy hair and a loud laugh, stood up to make a toast. He swung his arm wide and his glass of red wine went flying. The dark liquid splashed across the wall, hitting the large oil painting hanging above the sideboard. It was a portrait of Evelyn, my late wife. It was the last painting she ever made before the cancer took her. It was the heart of this house. The wine dripped down her painted smile like a wound. The room went silent for a second. Then the man laughed. "Oops. Hey, Brad, that painting is ugly anyway. You should take it down. Put up a 100-inch screen for the game." Brad laughed with him. "You are right. It is ancient trash. Hey, Clint. Get a rag, clean this mess up, and take that thing down tomorrow. It ruins the vibe." I stood there gripping the steak knife I had been using to slice the roast. My knuckles turned white. The rage that surged through me was cold and absolute. I wanted to drive the knife into the table. I wanted to throw every single one of them through the panoramic windows. But I looked at Sarah. She was shrinking in her chair, terrified of what would happen next. If I reacted now, Brad would take it out on her later. I put the knife down. I picked up a cloth. I walked to the painting and gently dabbed the wine from Evelyn's face. I apologized to the man who had ruined it. I poured him more wine. Brad smirked triumphantly. He thought he had broken me. He thought I was a weak old man clinging to a free ride. He had no idea he had just declared war on a man who used to crush concrete for a living. After dinner, the party moved to the pool deck. Music blared, shaking the foundations of the villa. I started clearing the plates. Brad walked in, his arm around the shoulders of the greasy-haired man. "Clint, listen up," he said. "We need the rooms. All of them. My partners need the ocean views. You are going to have to sleep in the guest house." I looked at him. The guest house was a small storage shed near the gate. It had a cot and a toilet. It was where the previous owner kept his gardening tools. "You want me to sleep in the shed?" I asked. "In my own house." Brad stepped closer, invading my personal space. "This is not your house tonight, Clint. This is my headquarters, and you snore. You will keep the investors awake. Grab your pillow and get out. The master bedroom is mine." Sarah stood in the doorway. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. The shame radiating off her was palpable. I looked at Brad. I looked at the mob of parasites destroying my sanctuary. "Fine," I said. "I will sleep in the shed." Brad clapped his hands. "Great. Now get lost. And don't come up to the main house unless I text you." I grabbed a blanket and walked out into the cool night air. I walked past the pool where strangers were drinking my wine and swimming in their clothes. I walked to the small shed at the edge of the property. It was cold and smelled of fertilizer. I sat on the cot. The noise from the villa was a dull thump in the distance, but I did not sleep. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I opened it, and the screen illuminated the small, dark room. I was not just a retired builder. I was a man who believed in redundancy and security. I typed in a password. A grid of 20 video feeds popped up on my screen. Every room in the villa. The dining room. The pool. The hallways. And yes, the master bedroom. I had installed hidden high-definition cameras and microphones months ago, not to spy on guests, but because when you own a $4 million home, you protect it. I put on my headphones. The audio was crystal clear. I could hear Brad laughing in the living room. I could hear the clinking of glasses. I watched as they mocked my furniture and discussed which walls they would knock down. I opened a new window on my browser. I typed in a name. Leonard Katz. He was not just a lawyer, he was the shark that other sharks feared. He had been my legal counsel for 30 years. He was the reason I retired with my fortune intact. I dialed his private number. It was late, but Leonard always answered for me. "Clint," he answered, his voice gravelly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Leonard," I said, my eyes fixed on the screen where Brad was currently putting his feet up on my antique mahogany desk. "I have a situation. My son-in-law is in my house. He thinks he owns the place. He thinks I am senile, and he is holding my daughter hostage with fear." I heard Leonard shift in his chair. "What do you need, Clint? Do you want them evicted? I can have the sheriff there in 10 minutes. "No," I said. "That is too easy. Eviction is temporary. I need to destroy him, Leonard. I need to dismantle him piece by piece so that when he leaves here, he has nothing left. Not a dollar. Not a reputation. And definitely not my daughter." I watched on the screen as Brad pulled a document out of his briefcase and showed it to the greasy-haired man. The camera zoomed in. It was a deed to my villa. But it looked forged. "Leonard, I continued. I need you to run a full background check on Brad. Debts, associates, illegal activities, everything. And Leonard, get the jet ready. I need you to come here tomorrow. Why am I coming? Clint Leonard asked. Because I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Tomorrow you are not going to be my lawyer. You are going to be an investor. A very rich, very stupid investor from Dubai who wants to buy a villa. I saw Brad on the screen high-fiving his friend. He looked like he was on top of the world. He had no idea that the old man in the shed was about to pull the ground out from under him. I hung up the phone. I watched the screen. Let the games begin. The sun rose over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and bruised purple. But inside the gardening shed, the air was cold and stale. My back ached from the canvas cot. It was a physical reminder of the disrespect I was enduring, but physical pain was something I could handle. I had built skyscrapers in freezing rain and laid foundations in blistering heat. What I could not handle, what made the bile rise in my throat, was what I was seeing on the high-definition monitor of my laptop. I rubbed my eyes and took a sip of lukewarm water from a plastic bottle. On the screen, the main living area of my villa was bathed in the soft morning light. It was a beautiful space designed for tranquility, but at 6 in the morning, it had been transformed into a war room for con artists. Brad was already awake. He was pacing back and forth on my Persian rug, wearing a fresh suit that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of a beach house. He had set up a portable whiteboard in front of the panoramic window, blocking the view of the waves. Around him sat 4 of the men from the night before. They looked hungover, their eyes puffy and red, but they were listening. Brad was in full salesman mode. His hands moved frantically, chopping the air as he spoke. I adjusted the volume on my headphones, needing to hear every single lie that spilled out of his mouth. "Gentlemen, look at this place," Brad said, his voice trembling with a manic energy. "This is not just a house. This is the flagship location for the oceanfront villa project. 4 million in equity sitting right here. And the market value is easily 6. We flipped this into a timeshare model for high net worth individuals, and the returns are infinite." One of the men, a guy with a scar above his eyebrow, leaned forward. He looked skeptical. He was the kind of man who knew the smell of desperation. "It sounds good, Brad, but what about the old man? The guy who served us dinner? He seems pretty attached to the place." Brad laughed. It was a hollow, nervous sound. "Clint. Do not worry about Clint. He is just a placeholder." I leaned closer to the screen, my jaw tightening. A placeholder. That is what I was to him. Not a person. Not family. Just an obstacle. Brad lowered his voice, leaning in as if sharing a confidential secret. "Look, the truth is, my father-in-law is not all there. Early onset dementia. It is tragic, really. He thinks he is some big-shot retired tycoon, but half the time he does not know what year it is. That is why Sarah and I are here. We are his legal guardians." I felt a cold fury settle in my gut. He was painting me as senile. He was stripping away my agency, my dignity, to sell a lie to a bunch of sharks. The scarred man pressed him. "So, you have the paperwork. You have the power of attorney." Brad didn't even blink. "Signed and notarized last week. He signed the deed over to me for $1 just to keep the state from taking it for his medical bills. The house is mine, gentlemen. And by extension, it is ours to leverage. Lies. Pure, unadulterated lies." I had never signed anything. My mind was sharper than his would ever be. But as I watched, I realized this was not just standard greed. This was panic. Brad was sweating. His shirt collar was damp. He was moving too fast, talking too loud. He was a man running from an avalanche. Then his phone rang. The noise cut through his pitch like a knife. Brad jumped. He looked at the screen, and the color drained from his face. He held up a finger to his guests. Excuse me, gentlemen. This is the bank. Finalizing the details. I need to take this. He walked out of the living room and onto the pool deck. He thought he was out of earshot. He thought he was safe. He did not know that I had installed microphones in the outdoor planters specifically to monitor the maintenance crew. I switched the audio feed instantly. Brad answered the phone, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Tony, I told you I needed 48 hours. I listened intently. There was no bank on the other end. There was no loan officer. I am not trying to run, Brad hissed, clutching the railing of the balcony so hard his knuckles turned white. I am securing the asset now. It is a $4 million property, Tony. That covers the $2 million I owe you plus the vigorish. Just give me the weekend. $2 million. The number echoed in my headset. My son-in-law was not just a failure. He was in deep with loan sharks. He had gambled or speculated his way into a hole so deep he couldn't see the sky, and now he was trying to use my home, my sanctuary, as the ladder to climb out. He wasn't just selling the house, he was selling my life to save his own skin. Please, Brad begged. Do not come here. Do not send anyone to the house. My wife is here. Her father is here. If you show up, it ruins the deal and you get nothing. I will have the cash, I promise. Just do not hurt me. He hung up the phone and stood there shaking. He wiped his face with a handkerchief, composing himself, before putting the mask of the arrogant entrepreneur back on to face his friends inside. I sat back in the shed, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The sudden visit. The 20 friends. The desperation. He needed to show the loan sharks or their representatives that he had a tangible asset. He needed to look like he owned the place to buy time. And if he couldn't sell it legit, he would probably try to forge my signature and mortgage it to the hilt before fleeing the country. But the worst was yet to come. I switched the camera view back to the kitchen. Sarah had walked in. She looked like a ghost. She was wearing a high-collared robe, trying to make herself small, trying to be invisible. She started making coffee, her movements jerky and nervous. Brad stormed into the kitchen from the pool deck. He was still pumped up on adrenaline and fear, and he needed someone to take it out on. He saw Sarah and marched over to her, cornering her against the marble island. What are you doing? He hissed. I am just making coffee, Sarah whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. You are moping, Brad spat. You are walking around like a victim, and it is bringing down the energy. These men need to see a happy hostess. They need to see that we own this lifestyle. Fix your face, Sarah. I cannot do this anymore, Brad. Sarah said, her voice trembling but gaining a sliver of strength. You are lying to them. You are lying to my dad. You told me we were just visiting. You did not tell me you owed money to criminals. Brad grabbed her arm. I saw the grip on the screen. It was tight. Cruel. Keep your voice down, he growled. You think you have a choice. You think you can just walk away. I am going to tell him, Sarah said, tears spilling over. I am going to tell Dad everything. He can help us. He has money, Brad. He can fix this. Brad laughed, a dark, ugly sound. Your dad. That old bricklayer. He is on a fixed income, Sarah. He cannot help anyone. And if you open your mouth, if you ruin this deal for me, do you know what happens? Sarah shook her head, trying to pull her arm free. I will take Leo. Brad said. My heart stopped. Leo was my grandson. He was 3 years old, staying with his other grandmother back in the city while they came on this trip. Brad leaned into her ear, his face twisted with malice. I have already talked to a lawyer. I have documented your history of depression, Sarah. I will paint you as unstable. I will say you are unfit. If this deal goes south and I go down, I am taking the boy with me. You will never see him again. I will disappear with him so fast your head will spin. So you are going to smile. You are going to pour coffee for my partners. and you are going to keep your mouth shut. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, defeated. The fight drained out of her instantly at the mention of her son. She was trapped, hostage to his debt and his cruelty. Brad released her arm and smoothed his suit jacket. "Good. Now get the old man up. Tell him to clean the pool. It looks like a swamp." I watched as my daughter wept silently over the coffee machine. I watched the man who had promised to protect her threaten to destroy her. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dim light of the shed and felt a change come over me. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer about teaching a lesson to a rude houseguest. This was not about manners or respect. This was a rescue mission. Brad thought he was a wolf because he preyed on the weak. He thought he was playing a game of high-stakes finance. He did not know he was sitting on a trap door. He owed $2 million to dangerous men. He had committed fraud. He was blackmailing my daughter. I stood up and stretched. My joints popped. I put on my old work boots. I splashed cold water on my face. He wanted the old man to clean the pool. I would clean the pool. I would play the part. I would let him dig his hole so deep that when I finally kicked the ladder away, he would never see the light of day again. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice. "Leonard." I said, my voice low and steady. Clint Leonard answered. "You sound different. Is everything okay?" "No," I said. "The situation has changed. I need you to run a deeper background check, specifically on a debt of $2 million. Find out who holds the paper. Find out who he owes." "Consider it done," Leonard said. "What is the play?" "The play is total liquidation," I said. "I am not just kicking him out, Leonard. I am going to break him. I need you to get here fast and bring the full portfolio. We are going to put on a show." I hung up the phone and stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight. I walked toward the main house, my head down, my shoulders slumped, playing the role of the beaten old man. But inside, I was already counting down the minutes to his destruction. I spent the next hour in the pump room, located beneath the pool deck. It was a cramped space filled with the hum of machinery and the smell of chlorine, but to me, it felt like a command center. Brad thought he owned the villa because he held a forged deed, but ownership is not about paper. Ownership is understanding the systems that keep a structure alive. I knew every pipe, every valve, and every circuit in this house because I had designed them. I looked at the digital thermostat for the infinity pool. It was set to a luxurious 85 degrees. Above me, I could hear the thumping bass of house music and the raucous laughter of Brad and his sharks. They were celebrating a victory they had not yet won. They were drinking my wine and soaking in the warmth I paid for. It was time to introduce a little thermodynamic reality into their fantasy. I did not just turn the heater off. That would have been too slow. The thermal mass of 20,000 gallons of water would take days to cool down naturally. I needed a shock to the system. I opened the bypass valve that fed directly from the deep ocean intake. This system was designed for emergency fire suppression or rapid cooling, but today it was a weapon. I engaged the industrial pump. 34-degree seawater from the Pacific depths began to surge into the pool, mixing with the heated water. It was a silent, invisible assault. I watched the pressure gauges climb. Then I wiped my grease-stained hands on my old coveralls and waited. Up on the deck, the party was in full swing. Brad was holding a glass of champagne waiting in the shallow end, surrounded by 3 women in bikinis who looked bored. The scarred man from the morning meeting was floating on a raft, looking at the horizon. "Hey, Brad," one of the women shrieked. "Is it just me, or did it get freezing in here?" Brad laughed. "You are just adjusting to the breeze, babe. The water is perfect." But it wasn't. I could see it from the maintenance window. The steam that usually rose gently from the surface had vanished. The water was turning a darker, angrier shade of blue. Suddenly, the scarred man fell off his raft. He hit the water and came up, gasping, his eyes wide with shock. "Holy hell," he shouted, scrambling for the ladder. "It is ice water! What is wrong with this place?" Panic rippled through the pool. It was not a gradual cooling. It was an Arctic blast. People were scrambling out, their teeth chattering, their skin turning goosebumped and pale. The illusion of the tropical paradise was shattered in seconds. Brad stood in the middle of the pool, trying to maintain his composure, but his lips were turning blue. He waded toward the jets, expecting warmth, but felt only the bone-chilling bite of the ocean. "Clint," he screamed. His voice cracked. "Clint, get out here!" I took my time. I put on a pair of thick work gloves and grabbed a heavy wrench. I walked up the stairs, emerging onto the deck like a confused maintenance worker. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller, older. "What is it, Brad?" I asked, blinking against the sunlight. "Fix it," Brad yelled, shivering violently as he wrapped a towel around himself. "The heater is broken. My guests are freezing. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Fix it now." I walked over to the control panel on the wall. I tapped it with the wrench. I shook my head slowly. "I told you, Brad," I said, my voice raspy. "This system is 20 years old. The heat exchanger is shot. I have been keeping it running with duct tape and prayers, but with 20 people in the water, the load was too high. It blew the gasket." Brad looked at the shivering investors. He saw their annoyance. He saw the doubt creeping into their eyes. If he couldn't maintain a swimming pool, how could he manage a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio? "Well, buy a new one," he snapped. "Call someone." I sighed. "Parts are on back order from Germany. Takes 6 weeks. And it costs $15,000. Do you have $15,000, Brad?" He glared at me. He didn't have $15. "Fine," he hissed. "Just shut it down. Get out of my face." I walked away. Step 1 was complete. I had made them uncomfortable. I had shown them that the infrastructure of their dream life was rotting. But the real blow came 2 hours later. The mood in the house had soured. The cold swim had sobered everyone up. The sharks were getting restless. They wanted to see numbers. They wanted to see the business plan. Brad herded them into the living room. He had set up a large monitor and was preparing for a video conference with a potential buyer in Hong Kong. This was his Hail Mary play. If he could get a letter of intent from an international buyer, he could show it to the loan sharks and buy more time. I was in the hallway vacuuming. The noise of the vacuum cleaner was a steady drone. "Clint, turn that thing off," Brad shouted from the living room. "We are going live in 2 minutes." I turned off the vacuum. I began winding the cord slowly, methodically. Brad was sweating again. He adjusted his tie. He looked at the webcam. "Gentlemen," he said to the room and to the screen, "thank you for joining. What I am about to show you is a paradigm shift in coastal real estate." He clicked his mouse. A slide appeared on the screen. He began his pitch. He was good, I had to admit. He was a pathological liar, but he had charisma. He talked about occupancy rates and yield percentages. He was weaving a spell. The men in the room were leaning in. The face on the screen in Hong Kong was nodding. I walked into the room carrying a ladder. "What are you doing?" Brad hissed, covering the microphone. "Just changing a bulb, Brad," I whispered, pointing to the recessed light directly above the Wi-Fi router. "It is flickering. It looks bad for the presentation." Brad hesitated. He wanted me gone, but he also wanted the lighting to be perfect. "Just be quick," he whispered, "and do not make a sound." I set up the ladder. I climbed up slowly, my old joints creaking. I reached for the bulb, but my target wasn't the light. It was the Ethernet cable that ran along the ceiling beam, tucked neatly out of sight. It was the main feed for the house's internet connection. Brad was reaching the climax of his presentation. And that is why an investment of 5 million today secures a position of 10 million in 2 years, he said, his voice rising with confidence. All I need is your digital signature on the preliminary agreement, and we can proceed. The man on the screen opened his mouth to speak. I pretended to lose my balance. My foot slipped on the rung of the ladder. I flailed my arms. My hand grabbed the Ethernet cable as if to steady myself. With a sharp yank, I ripped the cable out of the junction box. The connection died instantly. The face on the screen froze in a pixelated grimace. Then the screen went black. A message popped up. No internet connection. Brad stared at the screen. He clicked the mouse frantically. "Hello," he said. "Mr. Chang, can you hear me?" Silence. The men in the room checked their phones. No Wi-Fi, no signal. The house was a dead zone. Since the villa was built into a cliffside, cell reception was non-existent without the signal boosters, which also relied on that cable. Brad turned around. He looked at me standing on the ladder, the severed cable dangling from my hand like a dead snake. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a deal dying. "You," Brad whispered. I looked down at him, my face a mask of apologetic senility. "I am sorry, Brad." I slipped. I think I pulled a wire loose. The scarred man stood up. He picked up his briefcase. "This is a joke," he said. "You are pitching a high-tech luxury resort, and you cannot even keep the internet on for 10 minutes. He walked out. The others followed. They didn't look back. They walked out to the terrace to find cell service, probably to call their Ubers. Brad was left alone in the room with me. He did not scream at first. He just shook. The veins in his neck bulged. His face turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. He looked like a kettle about to explode. He walked over to the ladder and kicked it. I held on tight, riding the impact. "Get down!" he roared. I climbed down. I didn't back away. I stood my ground. "You useless old parasite," Brad screamed. He grabbed my collar and shoved me against the wall. "You did that on purpose. You are trying to sabotage me." I looked him in the eye. "I am just an old man fixing a light bulb, Brad. Maybe if you paid for proper maintenance, these things wouldn't happen." He slapped me. It wasn't a hard punch, it was a slap of pure disrespect. My head snapped to the side. I tasted blood on my lip. "I do everything for this family," he yelled. "I hustle. I grind. I put food on the table. So, and what do? You leech off me. You live in my house. You eat my food. You are nothing. You are a useless leech, Clint. You cannot even change a light bulb without costing me millions." He looked around the room, searching for something to destroy, something to hurt me with, since he knew he couldn't beat me in a fistfight. His eyes landed on the mantelpiece. Sitting there was a blue ceramic vase. It was simple, elegant. It was the first thing Evelyn and I had bought together 40 years ago when we were living in a one-bedroom apartment. It held her ashes, a small portion of them that I kept close to me. Brad knew what it was. Sarah had told him. He walked over to the mantel. He picked up the vase. "You want to be clumsy," Brad said, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Let us see how clumsy things can get." "Brad, do not do it," I said. My voice was not acting anymore. It was a warning, a final warning. He smiled, a sick, twisted smile. "Oops," he said. He opened his hands. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the blue ceramic fall. I watched it rotate in the air. I saw the light catch the glaze. It hit the travertine floor. The sound of it shattering was louder than the ocean. It wasn't just a crack. It was an explosion of fragments. Gray ash spilled out across the polished stone, mixing with the shards of blue pottery. Brad looked at the mess. Then he looked at me. He dusted his hands off. "Clean it up," he said, "and get out of my sight." If I see you before tomorrow, I will put you in a home so fast you will not have time to pack your slippers." He stormed out of the room, heading for the liquor cabinet. I stood there staring at the pile of ash and ceramic. The anger I felt before was a fire. This was different. This was ice. This was the absolute zero of emotion. He had not just insulted me. He had desecrated the only thing I had left of the woman who made me a better man. I knelt down. I carefully began to pick up the pieces. I scooped the ash into my hands, feeling the grit against my skin. I did not cry. I did not shake. I placed the remains in a plastic bag. I put it in my pocket. Brad thought he had won. He thought he had asserted his dominance. He was wrong. He had just signed his own death warrant. I walked out of the living room. I walked past the kitchen where Sarah was hiding. I walked out to the shed. I sat down at my computer. I opened the chat window with Leonard. The message I typed was short. "Execute the Dubai plan. And Leonard, bring the full legal team. I want the police on speed dial." Leonard replied instantly. "Is it time?" I looked at the dust on my hands. "It is time," I typed. "Burn him to the ground." It was 2 a.m, and the silence in the shed was heavy. My stomach growled a low rumble that echoed in the small space. I had not eaten since breakfast. The catering spread I had served to Brad and his vultures had been lavish, featuring prime rib and lobster tails, but I had not been allowed a single bite. Brad had made it clear that the help ate when the guests were finished, and judging by the mess I saw on the monitors earlier, they had left nothing but scraps. But it was not hunger that drove me out of the shed. It was a feeling. A father's instinct. I had been watching the security feed, but the camera in the kitchen had a blind spot near the pantry, and Sarah had walked into that blind spot 10 minutes ago and had not come out. I put on my jacket and walked across the lawn. The grass was wet with dew. The house loomed above me, dark and silent like a sleeping beast. The party had died down, the sharks retreating to the guest rooms to nurse their bruised egos and cold limbs. I entered through the service door in the laundry room, moving silently in my socks. I could hear voices in the kitchen. They were low, urgent whispers. I crept closer, standing in the shadows of the hallway just outside the kitchen archway. I saw Sarah. She was standing by the oversized refrigerator holding a plastic plate. She was scraping leftovers from a serving platter, trying to be quiet. A half-eaten piece of steak, some cold potatoes, a bread roll. She looked terrified. She kept glancing at the ceiling as if afraid the sound of the fork against the china would wake the tyrant upstairs. She was trying to make a plate for me. My heart broke. Even in her fear, she was thinking of her old dad out in the cold. Suddenly, the lights flared on. Sarah jumped, dropping the fork. It clattered loudly on the floor. Brad stood in the doorway leading to the living room. He was wearing silk pajamas that he had probably charged to a credit card he could not pay. His hair was messy, and his eyes were bloodshot from stress and cheap whiskey. He looked at Sarah, then at the plate of food in her hand. "What do you think you are doing?" he asked. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Sarah trembled. I was just getting some food, Brad. It is going to be thrown away anyway." "For who?" Brad asked, taking a step closer. "For Dad," Sarah whispered. "He has not eaten, Brad. Please. It is just leftovers." Brad crossed the room in 3 long strides. He snatched the plate from her hand. He looked at the cold meat with disgust. "You are stealing from me," he hissed. "That is prime beef, Sarah. That cost $50 a pound. And you are going to give it to that old parasite in the shed. He is my father." Sarah cried, a tear escaping her eye. "He is hungry. He is a leech," Brad shouted, throwing the plate into the sink. The ceramic shattered, sending food flying across the counter. "He contributes nothing. He ruins my deals. He costs me millions. And you want to feed him. You want to nurture his incompetence." He grabbed Sarah by the shoulders, shaking her. "Are you stupid?" he yelled. "Do you not understand the position we are in? Every dollar counts. Every crumb counts. I am trying to save us, Sarah. I am trying to keep us from living on the street. And you are sneaking around like a rat, feeding a stray dog." "Brad, you are hurting me," Sarah sobbed, trying to pull away. "Good," Brad said, his face twisting into a mask of pure malice. "Maybe pain will help you remember who is in charge here. You do not make decisions, Sarah. You do not allocate resources. You exist to support me. And if you ever try to undermine me again, if you ever try to coddle that useless old man, I will make you regret it." "I am not undermining you," Sarah pleaded. "I just want him to eat." Brad released one of her shoulders and raised his hand. I did not breathe. I did not think. I just watched as his hand connected with her cheek. The sound was a sharp crack, like a whip. Sarah cried out, stumbling back against the counter, holding her face. She looked at him with wide, shocked eyes. He had threatened her before he had grabbed her, but he had never struck her. Not like this. "You made me do that," Brad said, pointing a finger at her, his chest heaving. "Look what you made me do. Do not look at me like that. You needed to learn." That was the moment. The final tether of my restraint snapped. The carefully constructed plan, the need for secrecy, the long game, it all faded into the background. There was only red. I stepped out of the shadows. I did not run. I did not shout. I walked into the light of the kitchen with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a freight train. Brad turned, hearing my footsteps. He looked surprised for a second, then he sneered. "Oh, look," he said. The dog came for his dinner. "You want to eat, old man? Lick it off the floor." I ignored him. I walked straight to Sarah. She was weeping quietly, her hand covering the red mark blooming on her cheek. I reached out and gently moved her hand. I looked at the injury. It was bad. Her skin was tender and bruising already. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I am so sorry." "Shh," I said softly. "It is not your fault, sweetheart. Go to your room. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." She looked at me and then at Brad. "Dad." "Please don't," she begged. "He is dangerous." "Go, Sarah," I commanded, my voice leaving no room for argument. She ran out of the kitchen, sobbing. I listened until I heard the click of the bedroom door lock upstairs. Then I turned to Brad. He was leaning against the island, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. He felt safe. He was 32 years old, in his prime gym fit, and fueled by rage. I was 69, gray-haired, and wearing old work clothes. In his mind, there was no threat. "You feeling brave, Clint?" he asked, mocking me. "You want to play hero? Go ahead. Take a swing. I will put you in the hospital, and then I will put you in a home. It will save me the legal fees." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taken my daughter's joy, who had spent my money, who had desecrated my wife's ashes, and who had just raised a hand to my child. I did not raise my fists. I stood up straight. I let my shoulders roll back, shedding the hunch of the beaten old man. I let my true height show. I let my eyes, which I had kept lowered and submissive for 24 hours, lock onto his. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was deep and resonant, the voice of a man who had commanded thousands of workers. Brad laughed. It was a nervous sound. He noticed the change in my posture. He noticed that I wasn't shaking. "Oh yeah," he said, stepping closer, trying to intimidate me. "And what are you going to do about it, old man? Are you going to fix another light bulb? Are you going to cry to your daughter? You are nothing. You are a broke, senile nobody living in my house." I took a step forward, entering his personal space. I did not blink. "This is not your house, Brad," I said. And I am not who you think I am. You think you are a predator because you bully women and old men. But you are not a predator, son. You are food. Brad's smile faltered. For a split second, he saw it. He saw the shark behind the eyes. He saw the man who had crushed unions and hostile takeovers. But his arrogance was too thick. He pushed the doubt away. "Get out of my face," he spat, shoving my chest. "Go back to your shed before I call the cops and tell them you attacked me." I brushed the spot where he touched me as if he were dirt. "I am going," I said. "But enjoy this night, Brad. Enjoy the bed. Enjoy the air conditioning. Because it is the last night of comfort you will ever have. When the sun comes up, your life ends." I turned and walked away. "What is that supposed to mean?" Brad yelled after me, his voice cracking slightly. "Are you threatening me?" I stopped at the door. I did not look back. "It is not a threat," I said. "It is a promise." I walked out into this darkness. My hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the effort of not killing him right there on the linoleum floor. I went back to the shed. I sat down at my computer. The screen was glowing, waiting for my command. Leonard was online. I typed with furious precision. "He hit her, Leonard. The gloves are off. We are not just taking the house. We are taking everything. Initiate the transfer of the title to the trust immediately. Backdate it to Monday. Make it look like he never had a claim." Leonard replied. "Copy that. What about the loan sharks?" I looked at the image of Brad on the screen, pacing the kitchen, pouring himself another drink, trying to shake off the fear I had put in him. "Send them the address," I typed. "Tell them he is trying to flee. Tell them he has the cash in the house." Leonard hesitated. "Clint, that is dangerous. If they show up..." "I want them to show up," I typed. "I want a full audience for the finale. Just make sure the police arrive 5 minutes later. I want him caught between the hammer and the anvil." I closed the laptop. I lay back on the cot, but I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, visualizing the next day. Brad thought he was waking up to a closing deal. He thought he was waking up to millions of dollars. He was waking up to an apocalypse. And I was going to be the one to open the gates of hell. The morning sun hit the villa with a brilliance that felt like an interrogation light. I sat on the edge of my cot in the gardening shed, listening to the ocean and waiting for the phone in my pocket to vibrate. It was 8 o'clock. Leonard knew the schedule. He knew that Brad would be at his most vulnerable right now, hungover, terrified, and desperate for a lifeline. I walked up to the main house. I moved slowly, dragging my feet, playing the part of the defeated old man who had been put in his place the night before. When I entered the kitchen, the smell of stale alcohol and expensive cologne was overpowering. Brad was sitting at the island, staring at his phone, his leg bouncing nervously. He looked like a man on death row, waiting for the governor to call. He didn't even look up when I entered. He just pointed at the coffee machine. "Make a fresh pot," he grumbled. "And don't break anything this time, or I will break your fingers." I moved to the counter, my head bowed. I could feel his aggression radiating off him like heat. He was cornered. He owed $2 million to violent men, and he had no way to pay. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and he was looking for someone to bite. Then his phone rang. It wasn't a normal ringtone. It was the specific chime for an unknown number. Brad stared at it. He was afraid to answer. He thought it was the loan sharks coming to collect a debt he couldn't pay. He let it ring 3 times, his hand hovering over the device, shaking. Finally, he swiped the screen and put it to his ear. "Hello," he said, his voice cracking. I turned my back to him, pretending to fiddle with the coffee filter, but I was listening with every fiber of my being. I knew exactly who was on the other end, and I knew exactly what he was saying. Mr. Bradley Thompson. Leonard's voice boomed through the speaker, loud enough for me to hear. He was using his best courtroom baritone, smooth, authoritative, and dripping with old money confidence. This is Arthur Sterling representing the Al Maktoum Private Equity Group based in Dubai. Brad froze. He sat up straighter, instinctively adjusting his tie even though nobody could see him. Yes, he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound professional. This is Brad Thompson. How can I help you? We understand you represent the owner of the oceanfront property at 445 Pacific Coast Highway, Leonard said. Our scouts have been monitoring this asset. We are looking to acquire a flagship property for a private client who requires immediate occupancy. We understand the property is not officially on the market, but my client is accustomed to getting what he wants. Brad's eyes went wide. He looked around the room as if searching for a hidden camera. This was the miracle he had been praying for. Well, Brad stammered. It is true the property is exclusive. We were planning to list it next month as a luxury timeshare opportunity, but for the right buyer, we might be willing to discuss a direct sale. Excellent, Leonard said. My client is not interested in negotiation, Mr. Thompson. He is interested in speed. He flies out on Monday. He wants the keys in his hand by Sunday evening. We are prepared to offer $6 million cash, all closing costs paid by us. Escrow closed in 24 hours. I heard the air leave Brad's lungs. $6 million. It was 50% over market value. It was enough to pay off the loan sharks, pay off his credit cards, and still walk away with millions in his pocket. It was the golden ticket. 6 million, Brad repeated, his voice trembling with greed. That is a very serious offer. It is a final offer, Leonard said, cutting him off. But there is a condition. My client values privacy above all else. He does not want to deal with committees or boards. He wants to deal with the sole owner. Do you have the authority to execute this sale today, Mr. Thompson? Do you have the title and the power of attorney for the current resident? Brad looked at me. I was standing by the sink, pouring water into the machine, making sure my hands shook just enough to look pathetic. He looked at me and he didn't see a father-in-law. He saw an obstacle that needed to be bulldozed. Yes, Brad lied smoothly. I have full power of attorney. The current resident is my father-in-law. He is elderly and in failing health. I handle all his affairs. Oh. The title is ready to transfer. Good, Leonard said. I will be there at 2 p.m. with the paperwork and the certified draft for the deposit. $1 million up front, the rest upon recording of the deed. Have the house empty, Mr. Thompson. My client does not like crowds. The line went dead. Brad sat there for a moment, holding the phone like it was a religious artifact. Then he let out a scream of pure, unadulterated joy. Yes, he shouted, jumping up and punching the air. Yes, I knew it. I am a genius. I am the king. He looked at me. His eyes were wild, manic. Did you hear that, old man? He yelled, pointing a finger in my face. 6 million. Cash. I just saved this family. I just pulled off the deal of the century. I turned around, slowly holding the coffee pot. Who was that Brad? I asked, playing the confused, senile fool. None of your business, Brad snapped, snatching the coffee pot from my hand. It is business. Big business. Now listen to me, Clint. You need to make yourself scarce. Go back to the shed. Stay there. Do not come out. Do not talk to anyone. But your friends, I said, gesturing to the living room where the hungover sharks were starting to stir. Brad sneered. Them. They are small time. They are pennies. I am playing in the big leagues now. He stormed into the living room, clapping his hands. All right, everybody up, he shouted. Party is over. Pack your bags. You have 10 minutes to clear out. His friends looked at him, confused and angry. What are you talking about? Brad the scarred man asked, rubbing his eyes. We are supposed to be here for a month. Change of plans, Brad said, grabbing the man's suitcase and throwing it toward the door. I have a private buyer coming. A whale. He wants the place empty. So get moving. You cannot just kick us out, one of the women complained. We drove 5 hours to get here. I do not care, Brad screamed, losing his temper. This is my house. This is my deal. Get out, all of you, now. I watched from the couch in shadows as he evicted his so-called partners. He was burning bridges with a flamethrower, confident that his new pile of cash would buy him better friends. They cursed him, they threatened him, but they left. Within 20 minutes, the driveway was clearing out. The invaders were retreating. Brad slammed the front door and locked it. He leaned against the wood, breathing heavy. He was alone in the house now, except for me and Sarah, who was still locked in her room upstairs. He turned his eyes darting around the room. He needed to secure the deal. He needed the paperwork Leonard had asked for. He needed to make his lie a reality. He marched into the home office. I heard him rummaging through drawers, throwing papers on the floor. He was looking for the deed. He wouldn't find the original because I kept it in a safety deposit box in the city, but he would find a copy I kept for reference. He came back into the kitchen holding the document. He also had a blank sheet of legal paper and a pen. "Clint, come here," he barked. I walked over, wiping my hands on my trousers. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to a stool. I sat. Brad placed the blank paper in front of me. "I need you to sign this," he said. "What is it?" I asked, squinting at the paper. "It is blank, Brad. It is for your medical insurance," he lied, his voice tight with impatience. "I am switching you to a better plan, one that covers memory care. Since you are obviously losing it, I need your signature to authorize the transfer." I looked at him. The lie was so thin it was insulting. He wanted my signature on a blank page so he could print a power of attorney or a quitclaim deed over it later. It was the oldest trick in the book. "I don't know, Brad," I said, hesitating. "I should probably read it first, or maybe show it to a lawyer." Brad slammed his hand down on the counter, startling me. "There is no time for lawyers," he shouted. "The enrollment period closes today. Do you want to die in a gutter, Clint? Do you want to be a burden on Sarah for the rest of your life? Sign the paper." He pushed the pen into my hand. I held it. I looked at the tip. "But it is blank," I repeated, my voice trembling. Brad leaned in close, his face inches from mine. I could smell the coffee and the desperation on his breath. "Sign it," he whispered dangerously. "Or I swear to God, Clint, I will put Sarah on the street. I will take Leo and move to a country where you will never find us. I will destroy everything you love. Do not test me, old man. Sign the paper." I looked down. My hand was shaking. Not because I was scared, but because I had to make this look real. I had to make it look like I was breaking under his pressure. I am right-handed. I have been right-handed for 69 years. I built my empire with my right hand. But in that moment, I switched the pen to my left hand. Brad didn't notice. He was too focused on the paper, too blinded by the $6 million dancing in his head. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote my name, Clinton Reeves. But I wrote it slowly, awkwardly. The lines were shaky. The loops were distorted. It looked like the signature of a man in distress, a man who was physically or mentally compromised. It was a signature that any forensic handwriting analyst would flag in a second. It was a signature that screamed duress. "There," I said, dropping the pen. "Is that okay?" Brad snatched the paper away. He looked at it. He didn't care what it looked like. He just saw a signature he could use. "Perfect," he said. "Now get out of here. Go to the shed. Lock the door from the inside. If you come out while my investor is here, I will hurt you. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said quietly. He turned his back on me, already pulling out his phone, probably to call the loan shark and tell him the money was coming. I walked out of the kitchen. I walked out of the house. I went to the shed, but I didn't lock the door. I sat down at my computer. I pulled up the feed from the office camera. I watched as Brad fed the blank paper with my signature into the printer. I watched as he printed a pre-drafted quitclaim deed onto the page. He held it up, admiring his work. He thought he had just stolen a $4 million house for the price of a threat. He carefully placed the forged deed in a leather folder. He placed it in the center of the desk. Then he ran upstairs. I switched the camera feed to the master bedroom. He was tearing through his suitcase looking for his best suit. He was grooming himself, preparing to play the role of the successful developer. One last time. I checked my watch. It was 10 in the morning. Leonard was scheduled to arrive at 2. I had 4 hours. 4 hours to set the stage for the final act. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Sarah. "Unlock your door," I wrote. "Pack a bag for you and Leo. Be ready to leave in 5 minutes." I waited. A moment later, the reply came. "Dad, I am scared." He took my car keys. I replied immediately. "I have a spare set. Meet me by the side gate. Trust me." I left the shed. I moved through the shrubbery, avoiding the line of sight from the master bedroom window. I met Sarah at the side gate. She was carrying a small duffel bag. Her cheek was swollen where he had hit her. "Dad," she whispered, hugging me. "What are we doing?" "You are going to a hotel," I said, handing her the keys to my old pickup truck, which I kept parked down the street. "Go to the Grand Hyatt in the city. I have already booked a room under my name. Pick up Leo, stay there. Do not answer your phone." "But what about you?" she asked, gripping my arm. "He is crazy, Dad. He is desperate. If this deal falls through—" "The deal is a trap, Sarah," I said, looking her in the eyes. "I said it." She looked at me confused. "You said it." "I am not who he thinks I am," I said. "And he is not going to hurt anyone ever again. Now go." I watched her run to the truck. I watched her drive away. She was safe. Leo was safe. The only leverage Brad had was gone. I walked back to the shed. I felt lighter, stronger. Now it was just me and him. I opened the chat with Leonard again. "The house is clear," I typed. "The hostage is safe. Proceed with the arrival. And Leonard, make sure the police are coordinated. I want them rolling up the driveway exactly 5 minutes after the money is on the table." Leonard replied. "The convoy is en route. We are bringing the heavy artillery." I leaned back in my cot. I watched Brad on the screen. He was practicing his handshake in the mirror. He was rehearsing his lines. "Welcome to Oceanfront," he said to his reflection. I smiled. "Welcome to hell, Brad." At 1 in the afternoon, Brad stormed into the gardening shed. He was holding a garment bag that smelled of mothballs and neglect. He threw it at me. It hit my chest with a dull thud. "Put it on," he barked. "And shave that stubble. You look like a vagrant." I unzipped the bag. Inside was a tuxedo. It was old, cheap polyester with satin lapels that had started to yellow with age. It was a rental-quality suit, likely something he had found in a thrift store or dug out of the back of a closet. It was a costume designed to strip me of any remaining dignity. I looked at him. "You want me to wear a tuxedo?" I asked calmly. "To clean the house." Brad sneered, adjusting his own cuffs. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit that probably cost $5,000. "No, Clint. You are not cleaning. Tonight you are serving. My investor, Mr. Sterling, is a man of class. He expects service. He expects a staff. And since you chased away my friends and my wife is useless, you are it. You are the butler." I stared at the cheap fabric in my hands. He wanted to reduce me to a servant in my own home. He wanted to show this wealthy investor that he had total dominion over his environment, including the people in it. It was a power play, pure and simple. "Fine," I said. "I will put it on." Brad nodded, satisfied. Good. And Clint, when Mr. Sterling is here, you do not speak unless spoken to. You pour the wine. You clear the plates. You keep your head down. If you embarrass me, I swear I will have you committed before the ink is dry on the check. He turned and left, slamming the door behind him. I shaved with cold water in the shed's small sink. I put on the white shirt, which was too tight at the neck, and the black trousers, which were too short at the ankles. I put on the jacket. I looked in the cracked mirror. I did not look like a billionaire builder. I looked like a sad, broken old man. Perfect. I walked up to the main house. The transformation was complete. Brad had hired a staging company to fill the house with rented flowers and generic art, attempting to cover the empty spaces where my personal touches used to be. He had ordered catering from a high-end bistro, plating it on my fine china as if he had a personal chef. He was setting the stage for the performance of his life. At exactly 2:00, a black limousine pulled through the gates. It was long, sleek, and intimidating. I had arranged it, of course, but Brad didn't know that. He watched from the window, bouncing on the balls of his feet, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. Here he is, Brad whispered to himself. Showtime. The limo stopped in the circular driveway. The driver got out and opened the rear door. Leonard stepped out. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Leonard Katz, my pit bull lawyer, was unrecognizable. He was wearing a white linen suit, a Panama hat, and dark sunglasses. He carried a gold-topped cane, not because he needed it, but because it looked expensive. He looked like a caricature of an eccentric billionaire, which was exactly what a man like Brad would expect an investor from Dubai to look like. Behind him, 2 associates stepped out carrying heavy metal briefcases. They were paralegals from Leonard's firm, but today they were financial auditors. Brad ran out the front door, his arms wide, a smile plastered on his face that looked painful. Mr. Sterling, Brad boomed. Welcome to Oceanfront. I am Brad Thompson. It is an honor. Leonard stopped. He lowered his sunglasses and looked at Brad over the rim. He did not smile. He did not extend his hand. He looked at Brad like he was a speck of dust on a windshield. Mr. Thompson, Leonard said, his voice thick with a fake transatlantic accent. You are younger than I expected. I trust your youth does not equate to inexperience. Brad faltered for a second, his hand dropping to his somewhat. Not at all, sir. I have been in real estate development for a decade. Please come in. We have prepared a light lunch. They entered the foyer. I was standing by the door, a silver tray in my hand, holding glasses of sparkling water. I kept my eyes on the floor, my shoulders hunched. Coat. Brad snapped at me, snapping his fingers. Take Mr. Sterling's hat. I stepped forward. I took the hat and the cane from Leonard. Our hands brushed. I felt a slight squeeze from Leonard. A signal. The game was on. Thank you, my good man, Leonard said to me, ignoring Brad completely. Brad guided them into the living room. He began his tour, pointing out features of the house with the confidence of a man who had memorized a brochure. He talked about the imported marble, which was actually domestic, and the smart home system, which he had barely figured out how to use. Leonard nodded silently, occasionally tapping things with his cane. Is the structure sound? Leonard asked, stopping in the center of the room. We plan to add a helipad to the roof. Brad didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Reinforced concrete. You could land a tank on the roof. I almost laughed. The roof was timber-framed. A helicopter would crash right through to the master bedroom. But Brad didn't know that. He didn't know anything about this house except the price tag. They sat down at the dining table. The view of the ocean was breathtaking. Brad sat at the head of the table, taking the seat that had been mine for 5 years. Leonard sat to his right. The 2 associates sat opposite, opening their briefcases and pulling out laptops and stacks of documents. Brad looked at the briefcases hungrily. He thought they contained money. "Shall we begin?" Leonard said. "My time is limited, Mr. Thompson. I have a flight to Zurich tonight." "Of course," Brad said. "Clint, wine. Now." I hurried over with a bottle of vintage Bordeaux. It was one of the few good bottles I had left hidden in the pantry. I poured a glass for Leonard, then for the associates. When I got to Brad, I hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough to annoy him before filling his glass. Brad took a sip and swirled it around his mouth, trying to look sophisticated. "Excellent vintage," he said. "It is a blend, you moron," I thought. Leonard pushed the wine aside untouched. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Thompson, we have reviewed the preliminary data. The location is prime. The square footage is adequate. The price of $6 million is agreed upon. However, my team has raised a query regarding the chain of title." Brad stiffened. "What query?" "The title is clean." Leonard gestured to one of the associates who slid a document across the table. It was a printout of the public property records. "According to the county assessor, the property is registered to a Clinton Reeves," Leonard said. "There is no mention of a Brad Thompson on the deed. We need to be absolutely certain that you have the authority to convey this asset. My client does not deal in ambiguity." Brad laughed. It was a loud, forced sound. He waved his hand dismissively. "Clinton Reeves is my father-in-law," Brad said. "He is the recorded owner, yes. But as I explained on the phone, he is no longer capable of managing his affairs." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "Incapable? Is he deceased?" "No," Brad said, leaning in conspiringly. "He is indisposed. Advanced dementia. He requires full-time care. I have been granted full power of attorney to liquidate his assets for his medical well-being." I was standing in the corner holding the wine bottle. My grip was so tight I thought the glass might shatter. He was declaring me mentally incompetent to a stranger just to facilitate a theft. "And do you have this power of attorney document?" Leonard asked. Brad reached into his leather portfolio. He pulled out the sheet of paper I had signed with my left hand earlier that morning. He had printed the legal text over my shaky signature. He slid it across the table with a triumphant smile. "Right here," Brad said. "Signed and notarized. I have full control." Leonard picked up the paper. He examined it closely. He looked at the signature. It was a jagged scrawl, barely legible. "This signature looks distressed," Leonard noted. "He has good days and bad days," Brad said smoothly. "That was a bad day." His hands shake, but his intent was clear. "He wants me to handle this. He trusts me implicitly." Leonard put the paper down. He looked at Brad, then he looked past him directly at me, standing in the shadows. "And where is Mr. Reeves now?" Leonard asked. "If he is a resident here, I would assume he is being cared for." Brad froze. He hadn't expected to introduce me. He wanted to keep the senile old man abstract a concept on a piece of paper. "He is around," Brad said, vague. "Resting, probably." "I see," Leonard said. "Well, Mr. Thompson, my client has a strict policy. We require visual confirmation of the seller. We need to verify that he exists and that he is indeed in the condition you describe. It is a due diligence requirement to prevent fraud." Brad started to sweat. He pulled at his collar. "Is that really necessary?" he asked. "He gets agitated around strangers. It might upset him." Leonard stood up. He picked up his hat. "No confirmation, no deal," Leonard said simply. $6 million is a lot of money, Mr. Thompson. We do not hand it over based on a piece of paper and a promise. If we cannot see Mr. Reeves, we will take our business elsewhere." Brad panicked. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "No, wait," he said, holding up his hands. "It is fine. It is totally fine. You can see him. In fact, he is right here." Brad turned slowly and pointed a shaking finger at me. That is him, Brad said. The butler. Leonard turned his head slowly, feigning surprise. The staff. Brad let out a nervous chuckle. We try to keep him active. It helps with the confusion. He likes to serve. It makes him feel useful. He forgets who he is most of the time, so we just play along. Leonard looked at me. He walked over to where I was standing. He stopped inches from my face. He looked into my eyes, searching for the man he had known for 30 years. Mr. Reeves. Leonard said, his voice respectful. Do you know where you are? I looked at Leonard. I looked at Brad, who was watching me with a gaze that was a mixture of threat and terror. His eyes were screaming at me, play the part or die. I lowered my head. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I blinked rapidly. Dinner is served, sir, I mumbled, my voice trembling. Would you like more wine? Brad let out a breath he had been holding. He rushed over and put a heavy arm around my shoulders. He squeezed. It wasn't a hug. It was a vice grip. His fingers dug into my trapezius muscle, pinching the nerve. It was agonizing. See, Brad said, his voice loud and jovial while his hand inflicted pain. He is completely gone. He thinks he is a waiter. It is sad, really. But we take care of him. We give him a purpose. He squeezed harder. I winced, but I did not pull away. Tell the man who owns this house, Clint, Brad commanded, his breath hot in my ear. Tell him who takes care of everything. I looked up at Brad. I saw the cruelty in his eyes. I saw the absolute certainty that he had won. You do, sir, I whispered. You own everything. Brad smiled at Leonard. See? He knows. Even in his fog, he knows who the boss is. He turned back to me. Good job, old man, Brad said. Now pour the gentleman some water and get back in your corner. And try not to drool on the guests. He shoved me away. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. Brad walked back to the table, adjusting his jacket, feeling like a king. He sat down and looked at Leonard. So Brad said, leaning back in my chair, You have seen the owner. You have the paperwork. Can we conclude this business? I have other interested parties, and I would hate to lose this opportunity. Leonard sat down slowly. He looked at the forged document. He looked at Brad. Then he looked at the heavy metal briefcases his associates had placed on the table. Very well, Mr. Thompson, Leonard said. You have satisfied our inquiries. We are prepared to move forward. He nodded to one of the associates. The man clicked the latches on the briefcase. The sound was loud in the quiet room. He opened the lid. Inside were stacks of bound cash, $1 million in $100 bills. It was a prop, of course, drawn from my own liquid assets for this specific theater. But to Brad, it was salvation. It was freedom. It was power. Brad stared at the money. His mouth watered. He reached out a hand as if to touch it. The deposit, Leonard said, closing the lid with a snap. As agreed. All we need is your signature on the sale agreement and the keys to the property. Brad grabbed a pen. He didn't even read the contract Leonard placed in front of him. He didn't check the clauses. He just saw the money. Where do I sign? He asked, his voice trembling with greed. Right there, Leonard said, pointing to the line at the bottom. Transfer of ownership. Full liability accepted by the seller. Brad signed. He scrawled his name with a flourish. Bradley Thompson. He put the pen down. He looked at Leonard. Done, he said. The house is yours. Leonard picked up the contract. He checked the signature. He folded the paper and placed it in his breast pocket. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, Leonard said. The transaction is recorded. Brad stood up. He reached for the briefcase of money. Pleasure doing business with you, he said. Now, if you will excuse me, I have some debts to settle. He put his hand on the handle of the briefcase. I stepped forward from the corner. I walked to the stereo system on the sideboard. I pressed a button. The music stopped. The room went silent. Brad looked at me annoyed. "What are you doing, Clint?" he snapped. "I told you to stay in the corner." I did not answer. I took off the white jacket. I threw it on the floor. I undid the top button of the tight shirt. I rolled up my sleeves, revealing the thick forearms of a man who had worked for a living. I walked to the table. Brad watched me, confusion clouding his face. "Clint," he warned, "back off." I stopped at the head of the table. I looked at Leonard. "Counselor," I said, my voice clear and strong, devoid of any tremor. "Is the contract binding?" Leonard smiled. A genuine predatory smile. "It is ironclad, Mr. Reeves. He has accepted full liability for the sale of a property he does not own. He has accepted the deposit. He has committed fraud in the first degree with a witness and a notarized signature." Brad looked from me to Leonard, his eyes darting back and forth. "Counselor," he stammered. "What are you talking about? Who are you calling counselor?" I looked at Brad. I looked at the hand that had struck my daughter. I looked at the man who had treated me like a dog in my own home. "He is not talking to you, Brad," I said. "He is talking to me." Brad laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. You are the butler. You are senile." "No, Brad," I said. "I am the landlord." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I pressed a key. Suddenly, the sound of Brad's voice filled the room, booming from the hidden speakers I had installed in the ceiling. It was the recording from the kitchen the night before. "I will take Leo. I will paint you as unstable. I will disappear with him so fast your head will spin." Brad's face went white. He looked up at the speakers, then at me. "What is this?" he whispered. Then the recording changed. It was him on the phone with the loan shark. "It is a $4 million property, Tony. I am securing the asset now." The color drained from his face completely. He looked like a corpse. You recorded me," he gasped. "I did," I said. "I recorded everything. The threats, the fraud, the abuse, every single word." Brad lunged for the briefcase. He tried to grab the money and run, but Leonard's associate, the one who looked like an accountant, moved with the speed of a bodyguard. He grabbed Brad's wrist and twisted it, slamming his face into the table. Brad screamed. I walked over to him. I leaned down close to his ear. "You asked if I was useless, Brad," I whispered. "You asked what I do." I stood up. "I destroy pests," I said. And then the front doors blew open. The front doors of the villa did not just open, they exploded inward with a force that shook the crystal chandelier above the dining table. A team of 6 uniformed officers swarmed into the room, their boots heavy on the travertine, their hands resting on their holsters. The flashing blue and red lights from the cruisers outside bathed the room in a chaotic strobe effect, cutting through the artificial calm of the business meeting. Brad jumped back, clutching the metal briefcase to his chest like a shield. For a split second, relief washed over his face. In his delusional narcissism, he actually believed that this was the cavalry he had not called, but surely deserved. He thought perhaps the neighbors had called about the noise, or that this was simply security coming to remove the riffraff. He straightened his spine, adjusting his grip on the money that he believed was his salvation. "Officers," Brad shouted, stepping forward and attempting to use his most authoritative voice. "Thank God you are here. I want these men removed immediately. They are trespassing on my property. And arrest that old man, he assaulted me." The lead officer, a sergeant with a face carved from granite, ignored Brad completely. He scanned the room, his eyes passing over Leonard, over the associates, and landing squarely on me. He gave me a curt nod of recognition. I had built the precinct station where he worked 20 years ago. We knew each other. Then he turned to Brad. "Bradley Thompson," he barked, his voice cutting through the room louder than Brad's pathetic shouting. "Put the briefcase on the table And put your hands behind your head. Brad blinked. He looked around, confused. Me? No, officer, you are mistaken. I am the owner. I am the victim here. These men are scammers. I said, "Put the briefcase down!" The sergeant roared, taking a step forward, his hand uncomfortably close to his taser. You are under arrest for criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and domestic battery. Brad's mouth fell open. Trespass. This is my house. I have the deed. I just signed the contract. He looked at Leonard for help. Mr. Sterling, tell them. Tell them we just closed. Leonard sat calmly in his chair, watching the scene with the detached amusement of a man watching a play he had already read the reviews for. He did not speak. He simply tapped his gold-topped cane on the floor in a rhythmic, slow tempo. Brad looked at me. I was no longer standing in the shadows. I was no longer hunched over. The transformation that had begun when I ripped off the waiter's jacket was now complete. I walked around the table. I moved with the heavy, deliberate grace of a man who owned the ground he walked on. I stopped in front of the stereo system where I had cut the music earlier. Officer, hold on a moment, I said. My voice was not the raspy whisper of the senile butler. It was the gravel and steel voice of Clinton Reeves. Before you take him away, I think there is something everyone needs to hear. A closing statement, if you will. Brad stared at me. He looked at my posture, my eyes the way the police officer waited for me to speak instead of ordering me to the floor. The realization was starting to creep in, a cold, slow horror dawning behind his eyes. Clint, he whispered, what are you doing? I did not answer him. I pulled my phone from my pocket and connected it to the main audio feed. I swiped the screen. The speakers, which had been playing soft jazz an hour ago, crackled to life. Brad's voice filled the room, amplified, distorted by his own rage, but undeniable. If this deal goes south and I go down, I am taking the boy with me. You will never see him again. I will disappear with him so fast your head will spin. The recording was crystal clear. It was the threat he had made to Sarah in the kitchen. The threat that had signed his warrant. Brad flinched as if he had been slapped. He looked at the speakers, then at me. You are going to smile. You are going to pour coffee for my partners. And you are going to keep your mouth shut. Do you understand? The audio continued playing, the sound of his cruelty echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Dad, please don't. He is dangerous. Go, Sarah, I commanded. The recording ended with the sound of Sarah weeping. I hit the stop button. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. That I said, pointing at the speaker, is why you are going to jail, Brad. Extortion. Kidnapping threats. Domestic abuse. The police have a copy. Child Protective Services has a copy. And my lawyers have a copy. Brad shook his head, backing away until he hit the edge of the table. You set me up. You entrapment. This is illegal. I took a step closer. The police let me pass. They knew this was personal. And as for the house, I continued reaching into the inside pocket of my discarded jacket, which was draping over a chair. I pulled out a blue folder. It wasn't the fake deed Brad had forged. It was a certified legal document stamped and sealed. You forced me to sign a piece of paper this morning, Brad. You thought you were clever. You thought you were stealing a $4 million asset from a confused old man. I threw the blue folder onto the table. It slid across the polished surface, stopping inches from Brad's hand. Read it, I said. Read the date. Brad looked at the folder. He didn't want to touch it. He knew it was poison. Read it, I roared, my voice shaking the windows. Brad opened the folder with trembling fingers. He looked at the document. It was a property title transfer. This house, he stammered. It says, the Sarah Reeves Trust. That is right, I said, leaning in close so he could see the fire in my eyes. I transferred the title 3 days ago, Brad. The moment I heard you threaten my daughter in the car. The moment I heard her cry. I called Leonard and we moved the asset. This house does not belong to Clinton Reeves anymore. It belongs to an irrevocable trust for the benefit of Sarah and Leo. I pointed at the paper he had forced me to sign earlier, the one Leonard had put in his pocket. So when you forced me to sign that quitclaim deed this morning, I said you were forcing me to sign over something I did not legally own. I had no authority to sell it to you. My signature, even if it wasn't forged with my left hand, was worthless. You tried to steal a ghost, Brad. You committed fraud, forgery, and coercion for absolutely nothing. Brad looked at the document, then at the briefcase of money, then at Leonard. But the deal, he whispered. The $6 million. You signed the contract, Mr. Sterling. You accepted the liability. Leonard stood up. He took off his sunglasses. He removed the Panama hat and placed it on the table. Without the props, he looked exactly like who he was. The most ruthless litigator in the state. Mr. Thompson, Leonard said, his voice dropping the fake accent, returning to his natural sharp tone. My name is not Arthur Sterling. My name is Leonard Katz. I am Mr. Reeves' personal attorney. And that money in the briefcase is not a deposit from a buyer in Dubai. It is Mr. Reeves' own liquid capital withdrawn this morning to facilitate this sting operation. Brad looked at the money. He realized he had been holding his own execution warrant. You accepted $1 million under false pretenses, Leonard continued reciting the law from memory. You attempted to sell a property you did not own. You forged a signature. And you did it all in front of 3 witnesses and a team of auditors. That is grand larceny. That is wire fraud. And since you intended to use the proceeds to pay off a criminal enterprise, we are adding money laundering to the list. Brad's legs gave out. He slumped into the chair, the fight draining out of him like water from a broken vase. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The arrogance that had defined him for the last 48 hours was gone, replaced by the raw terror of a man who knows his life is over. He looked up at me. Tears were streaming down his face. Dad, he whimpered. Dad, please. I was desperate. I owe people money, bad people. If I go to jail, they will find me. They will kill me. You cannot let them take me. We are family. I looked at him. I remembered the way he spoke to Sarah. I remembered the way he broke Evelyn's vase. I remembered the way he treated me like a dog. Family, I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. You are not family, Brad. You are a disease. You infected my daughter's life. You threatened my grandson. You tried to erase me. I leaned down, getting right in his face. And do not call me Dad. My name is Mr. Reeves, and you are trespassing. I stood up and nodded to the sergeant. Get him out of my house, I said. The sergeant stepped forward. He grabbed Brad by the shoulder and hauled him up. He spun him around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Brad started screaming as they dragged him toward the door. He was begging, he was crying. He was making promises he could never keep. Clint, please, he yelled. I can fix this. I can pay you back. Sarah loves me. Leo needs his father. I watched him go. I did not feel pity. I did not feel remorse. I felt only the cold satisfaction of a job finished. As they dragged him through the foyer, the front door opened again. But it wasn't more police. It was a group of 3 men. They were wearing leather jackets and jeans. They looked out of place in the beach villa. They looked like trouble. It was the loan sharks, or at least their collection agents. Leonard had sent them the address just as I asked. They stopped in the doorway, blocking the police exit. They looked at Brad in handcuffs. They looked at the briefcase on the table. Is that Brad Thompson, the lead man? Asked his voice rough. The sergeant paused, holding Brad by the arm. "Who is asking?" "We are business associates," the man said, smiling a smile that showed too many teeth. "We heard he was coming into some liquidity. We just wanted to congratulate him." Brad went limp in the officer's grip. He saw the men. He knew who they were. "Officer, please," he screamed, thrashing against the cuffs. "Do not let them near me. Take me to jail. Take me now. Please, just get me out of here." The sergeant looked at the men, then at Brad. He understood. "You gentlemen can take it up with the district attorney," the sergeant said. "He is in custody." The lead man nodded slowly. He looked at me. He tipped his head in respect. Then he looked at Brad. "We will see you around." "Brad," he said, "jails have visiting hours." They turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Brad was sobbing uncontrollably now. He knew that prison was not going to be a sanctuary. His debts had followed him, and now he had nowhere to run. The police dragged him out the door. The flashing lights illuminated his face one last time, a mask of absolute terror. Then he was shoved into the back of a cruiser. The room went quiet. Leonard sat back down. He picked up the glass of wine I had poured him earlier. He took a sip. "Not bad," he said. "A little dramatic with the audio recording, but effective." I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 days. My shoulders dropped. The adrenaline started to fade, leaving me tired. Bone-deep tired. "Is it over?" I asked. Leonard nodded. "It is over, Clint. The trust is secure. Sarah has full custody by default since he is facing a felony. The restraining order is already being filed. He will never get within 100 yards of you or Leo again." I looked at the empty chair where Brad had sat. I looked at the fake contract. I looked at the $1 million in the briefcase. It was just paper. All of it. Just paper and noise. I walked over to the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ocean. The water was calm, indifferent to the chaos that had just occurred. I saw a movement by the gate. A pickup truck was pulling in. It was my old truck. Sarah got out. She was holding Leo in her arms. She looked at the police cars leaving. She looked at the house. She saw me in the window. She didn't smile. She just nodded. A nod of understanding. A nod of relief. I turned back to Leonard. "Pack up the money, Leonard," I said, "and get a cleaning crew in here. I want every trace of him gone before Sarah walks through that door." Leonard snapped the briefcase shut. "Consider it done." I walked toward the door to meet my daughter. I was not a butler. I was not a victim. I was Clinton Reeves, and I had my home back. The room was spinning with the chaotic energy of a crime scene, but amidst the flashing lights and the shouting, Leonard Katz stood like a statue of judgment. He reached up and slowly removed the dark sunglasses, placing them on the table next to the briefcase of cash. He took off the Panama hat and smoothed his silver hair. The eccentric billionaire from Dubai vanished, and in his place stood the shark of Wall Street. He looked down at Brad, who was slumped in the chair, his hands shaking so violently they rattled against the wood. "Mr. Thompson," Leonard said, his voice dropping the fake accent and adopting the razor-sharp tone that had destroyed CEOs in courtrooms for decades. "I think introductions are in order. My name is not Arthur Sterling. I am Leonard Katz, senior partner at Katz & Associates, and I have been Mr. Reeves' personal attorney for 30 years. Brad looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He tried to speak, but only a strangled noise came out. He looked from Leonard to me, trying to process the deception. Leonard tapped the contract Brad had just signed. "You see, Brad, you just walked into a federal trap. You accepted a $1 million deposit for a property you do not own. You signed a contract claiming sole ownership based on a forged deed. That is wire fraud. That is grand larceny. And since you accepted the funds across state lines via my associates, we are looking at federal jurisdiction. You are not just going to jail for the night. You are going away for a very long time. Brad hyperventilated. He clawed at his collar. No, he gasped. No, I did not know. I thought he was senile. I thought I had the right. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Leonard snapped. And neither is stupidity. You tried to steal $4 million from the wrong man. The police sergeant stepped forward, grabbing Brad by the arm to hoist him out of the chair, but before he could snap the cuffs on a commotion at the front door, stopped everyone cold. The heavy oak doors, which had been left ajar by the police, were pushed open. 3 men walked in. They were not police, they were not lawyers. They were the kind of men who did not need to raise their voices to be heard. They wore leather jackets and expensive jeans. They looked out of place in a beach villa, but they looked entirely comfortable with violence. Brad saw them and let out a scream that sounded more like an animal in a trap than a human being. He scrambled backward, knocking his chair over, trying to put the police officer between him and the new arrivals. Officer Brad shrieked, his voice pitching up in hysteria. Keep them away. Do not let them in. Arrest me. Please just arrest me and take me out of here. The sergeant put a hand on his holster. Who are you? He barked at the men. The lead man, a towering figure with a scar running through his eyebrows, smiled. It was a cold smile that showed too many teeth. We are just business associates, officer. We heard our friend Brad here came into some liquidity. We are just here to collect what is owed. I stepped forward. I knew exactly who they were. When I had told Leonard to leak the address, I knew it would bring the vultures. But seeing them here in my living room brought a grim satisfaction. Brad had borrowed money from the worst kind of people to fund a lifestyle he could not afford, and now the bill was due. Brad was trembling so hard his teeth were chattering. He knew that prison was a sanctuary compared to what these men would do to him. He knew that if the police let him go, he would not make it to the end of the driveway. Tony sent us, the man said, looking directly at Brad. He wants his $2 million, Brad. Plus the vigorish. He heard you sold the house. He wants to know why you haven't called. Brad stammered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. I have the money. It is right there. He pointed at the briefcase on the table. The man looked at the briefcase, then at the police, then at me. He seemed to realize the situation. The money was evidence. It wasn't going anywhere. Looks like you are having a bad day, Brad, the man said. Don't worry. Debts don't expire just because you are locked up. We will be waiting. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brad collapsed. His legs gave out and he fell to the floor, sobbing. He crawled. He actually crawled across the travertine floor, dragging his expensive suit through the dust of the shattered vase he had broken earlier. He crawled toward me. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my trousers. I looked down at him. This man who had strutted through my house like a king, who had treated me like a servant, who had raised his hand to my daughter, was now groveling at my feet. Dad, he wailed. Dad, please. You have to help me. Pay them. You have the money. I know you have it. Pay them off and I will disappear. I promise. I stood still. I did not move away. I wanted him to feel the distance between us even as he touched me. I am sorry for everything, Brad cried, burying his face in his hands. I was desperate. I made a mistake. But we are family. You cannot let them kill me. You cannot let me go to prison. Think of Sarah. Think of Leo. We are family, Dad. Please. The room was silent except for his pathetic sobbing. The police watched. Leonard watched. Even the loan sharks watched. Everyone was waiting for my answer. Everyone was waiting to see if the old man had a soft heart. I thought about Sarah hiding in a hotel room with a bruised cheek. I thought about the years of disrespect. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he told me to sleep in the shed. I leaned down slowly. I brought my face close to his so he could look into my eyes one last time. I wanted him to see that there was no mercy there. There was no forgiveness. There was only the cold, hard reality of consequences. I reached down and peeled his fingers off my pant leg one by one. I did it gently, but with a strength that made him flinch. I stood up and brushed the fabric where he had touched me as if he were something foul. I looked him dead in the eye. "Family," I said, my voice low and steady, echoing in the silent room. "You are not family, Brad. Family protects. Family provides. You are a parasite." Brad's eyes widened. He saw the finality in my face. "My family is Sarah," I continued. "My family is Leo. My family is the memory of the woman whose ashes you swept up like garbage." I gestured to the police officer. "Take him," I said. But Brad lunged again, screaming, "No, Clint, please. You can't do this. I am your son-in-law." I turned my back on him. I walked toward the window, looking out at the ocean that I had bought this house to enjoy. "You are not my son-in-law," I said over my shoulder, delivering the final blow. "You are just an accounting error, Brad. A mistake. And today I am balancing the books. You are being written off." The sergeant hauled Brad to his feet. He snapped the handcuffs on. The sound was metallic and final. Brad screamed and thrashed, but it was over. He was dragged out of the house past the loan sharks who watched him with predatory patience, past the fake investor who had dismantled his lie, and past the old man he had underestimated. As they shoved him into the police cruiser, his screams faded, replaced by the rhythmic crashing of the waves. Leonard walked up beside me. He handed me a glass of whiskey. "Cold," he said, "but necessary." I took the glass. I looked at the empty driveway where the invaders had once parked. I looked at the spot on the floor where the vase had shattered. "It is done," I said. Leonard nodded. "It is done. Now let's get your daughter home." I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, but it felt good. It felt like victory. I took out my phone and dialed the hotel. It was time to tell Sarah that the monster was gone and the castle was safe once again. The sirens faded into the distance, eventually replaced by the rhythmic eternal sound of the Pacific Ocean crashing against the rocks below. The flashing red and blue lights that had painted my living room walls in chaotic strobe patterns were gone, leaving only the warm, steady glow of the recessed lighting. I stood in the center of the foyer, watching the heavy oak door close. Leonard Katz stood beside me, buttoning his suit jacket. The shark was gone and my old friend was back. He looked tired. We were both tired. It is not easy to dismantle a man's life in a single afternoon, even if that man deserves it. Leonard looked at me and offered a small, weary smile. He did not say congratulations. He did not offer a platitude. He simply reached out and shook my hand. It was a firm grip, the kind that seals a pact between men who know where the bodies are buried. "I will handle the arraignment," hearing Leonard said quietly. "You do not need to be there. I will make sure the restraining order is served before he is even processed. He will not make bail, Clint. Not with the federal charges pending, and certainly not with the associates waiting for him outside." I nodded. "Thank you, Leonard. Send the bill to the usual account." Leonard laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "This one is on the house, Clint. I haven't had this much fun since the hostile takeover in '98. He picked up his briefcase, the one that had held the prop money, and walked out into the night. I locked the door behind him. I threw the deadbolt. The sound was heavy and final. I was alone. For the first time in 48 hours, the villa was mine again. But it felt different. The air was still thick with the tension of the confrontation. I could still smell Brad's cologne and the metallic tang of fear. I needed to purge it. I walked through the house. I picked up the half-empty glasses left by the loan sharks and threw them in the trash. I straightened the rugs. I opened the sliding glass doors to let the sea breeze rush in to chase away the stagnant energy of greed and desperation. Then I went to the kitchen. I found a broom and a dustpan. I walked back to the living room, to the spot where the blue vase had shattered. The ash was gone. I had collected it all, but there were still tiny fragments of blue ceramic caught in the grout of the travertine. I swept them up gently. I would not throw them away. I would put them in a jar. Scars are part of the history of a home. They remind us of what we survived. I heard the sound of tires on gravel. I froze. For a split second, my heart hammered against my ribs, thinking that perhaps the nightmare wasn't over, that perhaps Brad had escaped, or his friends had returned. But then I heard the engine cut. It was the distinct rattle of my old pickup truck. I walked to the front door and opened it. Sarah was standing by the truck. She was holding Leo, who was fast asleep, his head resting on her shoulder. She looked at the house. She looked at the empty driveway. She looked for the black SUVs, for the flashy cars, for the signs of the invasion. There was nothing. Just the quiet house and her father standing in the doorway. She walked toward me slowly. Her steps were tentative, as if she were walking on ice. She was waiting for the shouting to start. She was waiting for Brad to storm out and reprimand her for being late or for holding the baby wrong. The trauma he had inflicted on her was deep. It would take more than one night to heal. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. She looked up at me. Her cheek was still swollen, a purple bruise blooming against her pale skin, but her eyes were clear. "Is he gone?" she whispered. I nodded. "He is gone, sweetheart." "Is he coming back?" she asked, her voice trembling. I walked down the steps. I put my hands on her shoulders. They were shaking. "No," I said firmly. "He is never coming back. He is in jail, Sarah. And even if he gets out, he will never come near you again. I made sure of it." She looked at me, searching my face for the truth. She saw the resolve in my eyes. She saw the father who used to chase away the monsters under her bed. "He is gone," I repeated. "You are safe. Leo is safe. The house is yours." Sarah let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Her knees buckled. I caught her. I held her and my grandson tight against my chest. I felt her tears soaking into my shirt. She cried for the marriage that had been a lie. She cried for the fear she had lived in. She cried from the sheer, overwhelming relief of freedom. We stood there in the driveway for a long time, just holding each other under the stars. I stroked her hair just like I did when she was a little girl. "Come on," I said softly. "Let's go inside. It is getting cold." We walked into the house. Sarah stopped in the foyer. She looked around. The tension was gone. The house felt big again, but not empty. It felt ready to be filled with new memories. I carried Leo upstairs to the guest room. I tucked him into the big bed. He didn't wake up. He was innocent, peaceful. He would never remember the man who had threatened to use him as leverage. He would only know a grandfather who loved him and a mother who was free. I went back downstairs. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, staring out at the ocean. I poured her a cup of tea. She took it. Her hands were steady now. "Dad," she said. "Thank you. I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you fixed everything so fast." I sat down in the armchair opposite her. "I didn't fix it, Sarah," I said. "I just took out the rot. Now comes the hard part. Now we rebuild. But we do it together. You don't have to worry about money. The trust is set up. You and Leo are provided for. You can go back to school. You can paint again. You can do whatever you want." She smiled. It was a weak smile, but it was real. "I think I just want to sleep," she said. "For the first time in years, I think I can actually sleep." "Go," I said. "Rest. I will keep watch." She kissed my cheek and went upstairs. I waited until I heard her door close. Then I stood up. There was one last thing I had to do. I went to the pantry. I bypassed the cooking wine. I reached to the back of the top shelf and pulled out a bottle of dusty Pinot Noir. It was a bottle Evelyn and I had bought in Napa Valley 30 years ago. We had been saving it for a special occasion. We had saved it for a wedding, or a birth, or a retirement. We never drank it. Life got in the way. I took the bottle and a glass. I walked out to the terrace. The night air was crisp and smelled of salt and jasmine. The ocean was a black void stretching out to the horizon, rhythmic and eternal. I sat down in my favorite teak armchair, the one that faced the sea. I opened the bottle. The cork popped with a satisfying sound. I poured the wine. It was dark, rich, and complex. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small plastic bag containing the ash and the shards of blue ceramic. I set it gently on the table next to the wine. I looked up at the wall where the painting used to hang. I had taken it down to clean it properly, to remove the stain of Brad's disrespect. Tomorrow I would hang it back up. Tomorrow I would restore it to its place of honor. But for now I just looked at the empty space and I saw her face as clearly as if she were standing there. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted of blackberries and earth and history. It was quiet. The only sounds were the waves and the wind in the palms. No shouting, no demands, no fear. I raised my glass to the night sky. "I did it, Evelyn," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. I protected them. I held the line. I looked at the bag of ashes. I thought about the man who had broken the vase. I thought about the man who had tried to break our family. He was in a concrete cell now, surrounded by the consequences of his own greed. He was cold and he was alone. I was warm. I was home. I took another sip of wine and leaned back in the chair, feeling the tension of the last few days finally leaving my body. I looked at the spot where her painting would return tomorrow. I cleaned up the trash, Evelyn, I said, into the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, I closed my eyes and listened to the peace I had earned. True power does not need to shout. It resides in the quiet confidence of those who have built their lives with their own hands. My son-in-law mistook my silence for weakness and my kindness for senility, proving that arrogance is the most dangerous form of blindness. He learned the hard way that you should never judge a man by his worn-out clothes, for the hands that built the castle can also tear it down. Money can buy luxury, but it cannot buy loyalty or character. In the end, family is defined not by blood, but by who protects you when the storm comes. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to put an arrogant relative in their place?